I'm going to turn this floor over. Number one, if you have not given us your lunch order yet for the bar, we have the forms down in front. Make sure that you complete the form so that we will have the right lunch waiting for you when you get to Tampa. That's number one. Number two, please make sure that you sign the sign-in sheet that's being circulated for two reasons. We like to know who's here, and I need those email addresses in case I have to notify you about something. Sometimes questions come up, and I say, we'll get back to you on that particular point. We need correct email addresses. And if you don't sign that list, and you're here every day, which we hope that you will be, you don't get your Starbucks card because you have to sign the list so we know you're here, okay? And you'll want that Starbucks card. Also, gotta tell you, we had a couple of people who submitted multiple raffle tickets last time. I know you're eager to get that hotel room, and Professor Kang at the end of his lecture is going to do the drawing today. But one ticket per student per session. Okay? And Henry, wherever Henry is, if Henry's here, okay, Henry's not here, but Henry already got his room, so Henry would not be able to submit again. Okay, without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Professor Kang, who needs no introduction. You all know him. You all know you're going to get a really good lecture. Pay close attention because he knows what's tested on the bar. He knows the law, and he also gives a great lecture. So without further ado.
Thanks, Barbara. First of all, I guess I should say that it's very fortunate that I think the students have Dean Singer to help out with this, and then along with the rest of her staff. When I was a law school student, when you're, for the most part, for your other law school professors, we never had any support like this. Immediately upon graduation, we were sent an email saying, clean out your lockers by such and such a date. If you do not clean out your lockers by such and such a date, we will remove and discard everything. And, keep in touch. That was it. That was the email. And there was nothing like that. It was absolutely just, out the door. And so this is really good, I think, on the part of her and the rest of our staff. They do a fantastic job. With regard to the lecture today, it's a little bit underwhelming for those who have not had me, and here's why. The lecture was originally designed several years ago just for my students. Not because I wanted to hide anything from any of the other students, but because I suspected that all of the other students who did not take me for Con Law 2 had already gone over the religion classes. Am I right? The people who did not take me for Con Law 2. Everyone went over the religion classes, am I right? Yeah, this is true. The only people who did not go over the religion classes were my students, and it's all my fault. Every year we never even get to the religion classes because we go too damn slow. And it's entirely my fault. It's not my students' fault. It's entirely my fault. We just go too damn slow, so we never even get to it. That's why we go over the religion classes. It was originally intended for them. For those of you who were in the other Common Law 2 classes, this will be a little bit too familiar for you, but it might be useful in a tiny little way as a refresher, but it's mostly intended for my law school students who have never gone over it at all. The religion clauses, there are 2 of them in the Constitution. There are 2 of them. And the thing that I'm going to teach you today is just bare bones stuff. There's more stuff in your Barbary outline. I know that firsthand because I'm a Barbary lecturer for constitutional law. I can't teach here. It's Barbie's policy that you can't teach at your own school. It's sort of like marrying your mom. They won't let you do that. But I do go to other places and I teach constitutional law for Barbary. I know what's in the outline. I had to write the damn outline, so I know what's in the outline. This is just the bare bones stuff. Bare bones stuff. There are 2 clauses. 2 clauses in the religion clause. First is the free exercise clause. The first thing is called the free exercise clause. This is in the Constitution. It's in the First Amendment, the free exercise clause. And everything I will tell you is already in the outline. You don't have to add anything to it unless you want to add like little tiny side notes. Everything I will tell you is in the outline. There's nothing for you to add. All you need to do is listen. Feel free to ask me questions as we go along, but everything is already in here. The First Amendment contains 2 different clauses, the free exercise clause and the establishment clause. I'm going to talk about the free exercise clause first, and then I'm going to talk about the establishment clause. The free exercise clause says, Congress shall not abridge the right of free exercise of religion. And do you notice the phrase there? Congress shall not abridge the free exercise of religion. Now, you might be wondering, what do you do when the state or local government prohibits you from exercising your First Amendment rights? It says, Congress, can the city of Miami prohibit your free exercise of your religious rights? They can't do that, and here's what you do. If you get a bar exam question dealing with the religion issue, here's what you write first. This is the very first thing you write first. There is a free exercise clause issue, period. Say that first. There is a free exercise clause issue, period. Say that first. This is the second sentence you write. Congress shall not abridge the right of free speech, period. Congress shall not abridge the right of free speech, period. The Supreme Court extended this prohibition to state and local governments in Cantwell versus Connecticut. The U.S. Supreme Court extended this extended this prohibition. The U.S. Supreme Court extended this prohibition. The U.S. Supreme Court extended this prohibition to state and local governments in Cantwell versus Connecticut. Third sentence. And now you can do the analysis. So the first sentence, there is a free exercise clause issue, period. Congress shall not abridge the right of free speech, free religion. Did I say free speech? All I've been doing since school was out was I had a beer with Menzel. I had a beer with Menzel, a couple of beers with Menzel. And then I've been working on my book. I'm going to meet another professor and we're going to have a couple of beers next week. That's all I've been doing. Right of free speech is not what I'm supposed to say. Right of free exercise of religion is what I'm supposed to say. My apologies. First sentence, there's a free exercise clause issue, period. Next sentence, under the free exercise clause, Congress shall not abridge the right of free exercise of religion. Under the free exercise clause, Congress shall not abridge the right of religion. Under the free exercise clause, Congress shall not abridge the right of religion, period. Next sentence, the U.S. Supreme Court extended this prohibition to the states and local governments, Cantwell versus Connecticut. The U.S. Supreme Court extended this prohibition to state and local governments, Cantwell versus Connecticut. Now you have your boilerplate, those three things. Now you can do the analysis. Free exercise clause. The free exercise clause has been around since 1791. It's been around for such a long time. But the U.S. Supreme Court's jurisprudence on the free exercise clause, it really begins in 1991. In 1991, the U.S. Supreme Court comes up with the rule for the free exercise clause that has been governing ever since. In 1991, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case called Employment Division versus Smith. In 1991, the U.S. Supreme Court decided a case called Employment Division versus Smith. That's the case which decided what the free exercise clause has meant ever since 1991. Employment Division versus Smith. Here's the black letter rule that you need to know. It's already spelled out for you in the outline, but let me go ahead and rehearse it. Employment Division versus Smith, this is the black letter rule. There is no violation of the free exercise clause as long as the government treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. There is no violation of the free exercise clause if the government treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. That is the holding of Employment Division versus Smith in 1991. There is no violation of the free exercise clause if the government treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. Now you need some illustrations about what does it mean for the government to treat religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. What are some examples of this? And I have a couple of examples for you. Go to page 2 there, you see a couple of examples. You have Ted who believes that Satan is telling him to kill people. Florida obviously has a law against murder, every single state does. It doesn't care whether you're killing people because God tells you to or Satan tells you to, or whether you're doing it for purely secular reasons, like out of revenge or trying to get money. Ted is convicted of murder. He can't get out of jail by making the argument that the law violates his free exercise of religion. He cannot get out of jail by making that argument. Why can't he get out of that Why can't he get out of jail by making that argument? Yes, the homicide law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. Florida has a law that says you may not commit homicide. Then it has a definition of what homicide is. That law, you may not commit homicide, it treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. You killed your boss because you were angry at him, not because of religious reasons, you're going to face jail time. You killed your boss because Satan told you to, you're going to face jail time too. The law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. Does everyone see that? Very simple to understand. Let's take a look at the next example there. This is from a real case in the Supreme Court. The U.S. Department of Interior wants to take over land to cut it down for timber. If you're wondering, can the Department of Interior do that? Of course, the Fifth Amendment takings clause. The federal government can take private property for public use as long as there's just compensation. Using its Fifth Amendment takings powers, the Department of Interior decides to take private land so that for public use. There's a Native American group which shows that taking such property would destroy their ancestral burial grounds. And therefore, this Native American group says that this taking is a violation of the free exercise of religion because you are destroying our religious beliefs by taking over our private burial grounds. If the United States Department of Interior makes the argument that we've taken over adjacent lots for public use and paid just compensation to those people too, not because we have a problem with anyone's religion, but just because, frankly, we just want your timber and we're running out of timber, so no hard feelings. Are they treating religious people and non-religious people exactly the same? Yes, there's no violation of the free exercise clause. As long as they're treating religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, there's no violation of the free exercise clause. So if they're taking the land belonging to a Native American group and hurting their ancestral beliefs, their religious beliefs, their Native American church beliefs, if they're hurting them, but they're doing the same to another group, or they would have done the same to another group regardless of their secular or religious beliefs, they would be treating those people exactly the same. That's one of the things you're looking for on the bar. It's a law treating religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. Here's another example. This is actually from Broward County. I actually read this in the Sun Sentinel about 5 years ago. You have Kara. She's the high priestess of a religion that requires new members to pay for sex with Kara in order to retain membership. She is prosecuted for prostitution. May she overturn her conviction as a violation of the free exercise clause? Can she get out of jail by making the argument that if you put me in jail for prostitution, if you do this, you are violating my free exercise clause rights? Can she get out of jail? Or is that prostitution law applying equally to religious people and non-religious people in exactly the same manner? It's applying to them in exactly the same manner. Therefore, that law is not a violation of the free exercise clause. Another example, you have the IRS, which exempt all charitable organizations except churches. This violates the free exercise clause. Because do you see that? For those of you who are unaware of this, the IRS gives people tax breaks, organizations tax breaks, if they're doing charitable work. But charitable work can be done by both religious people and non-religious people. Catholic charities, they get a tax break. They don't pay all the tax that's withheld from them. The Red Cross, which is not a religious group, they also get a tax break as well. The IRS treats religious groups and non-religious groups exactly the same. But in this hypothetical, if the IRS said, we're going to give tax breaks only to churches which are doing charity work, but not to charity groups which are not affiliated with churches. In that case, you're not treating them exactly the same, and that would be a violation of the free exercise clause. Does everyone understand that? Yes? Okay. This is something that's been coming up in the news quite a bit, especially with regard to gay marriage. You have a law which defines marriage as between one man and one woman. You have this one Mormon group. They want for three different people to marry together. They make the argument that this definition of marriage as between one man and one woman violates the free exercise clause. Is it a violation of the free exercise clause? Probably the answer is no, because the law is requiring people to adhere to the one man and one woman rule regardless of what their religious beliefs are. If three people want to get together and marry for purely secular reasons because they're in love with each other, they're prohibited from doing so. If a Mormon group wants to do that because their God is telling them to do that, they're also prohibited from doing so. The secular group which wants to marry three people and the religious group that wants to marry three people, they're both prohibited in exactly the same way. Therefore, this is probably not a violation of the free exercise clause. Do you guys understand that? Okay, good. Now I want to go over the facts of Smith versus Employment Division for just a little bit to give you a sense of what's going on. And we're going to circle back to this case later on because there's something else I want to say about it. Employment Division versus Smith, the facts are pretty straightforward. Those of you who have not had me as a teacher already know this. You had Mr. Smith, who was a member of a Native American church. Mr. Smith, as part of his membership in the Native American church, smokes peyote, which in the state of Oregon is illegal at that time. Again, he's smoking the peyote because it's part of his Native American beliefs, his Native American religious beliefs in particular. He smokes peyote during his off time away from work in the desert with other members of his church. His boss finds out he's doing this, and he subsequently fires him. What makes the case particularly poignant is the fact that Mr. Smith has a job working as a drug rehab counselor. And so he's fired from his job. Remember, it's illegal in the state of Oregon to smoke peyote. It's a crime in that state. Smith makes the argument, after he's fired, he goes to get unemployment benefits from the Oregon Unemployment Division. The Oregon Unemployment Division, they usually give unemployment benefits for a certain couple of months as long as you can show that you were fired for good cause. I mean, you were not fired for good cause. So they interviewed him and they asked him, why were you fired? And they said, well, I smoked peyote. And then the Oregon Employment Division says, that's a crime in our state. But you're coming to us now saying you want money because you were fired for committing a crime. We're not going to give you money. We're not going to reward you for having committed a crime in the state of Oregon. So he was denied unemployment benefits. He sues the state of Oregon's employment division saying they denied me my unemployment benefits because they were discriminating against me as a member of the Native American church. This is the case which established the rule that we've been talking about thus far. The court rejected Smith's argument for the following reason. The Oregon Employment Division would have denied unemployment benefits to any human being who was fired from the job for committing a crime. If you were smoking peyote, not because you were a member of the Native American church, but just because you were curious to feel what it felt like, if you were fired for that reason, you would still not be able to collect the unemployment benefits in the state of Oregon. Therefore, the court decided the denial of the unemployment benefits to Mr. Smith did not constitute a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. The decision by the Oregon Unemployment Division, what standard of scrutiny should it be subject to? Strict scrutiny or rational review? Rational review, easy pass for the government. It's not subject to strict scrutiny, but rather just to rational review. Why? Because there's no violation of the Free Exercise Clause. But even those laws which do not violate any part of the Constitution, they got to be subject to some form of scrutiny. And usually the last and easiest form of scrutiny, as everyone knows in this room, is rational review. You guys know this, yes? Yes. Okay, good. Keep the facts of Employment Division versus Smith in mind. Go to page number 3. Page number 3. This is an actual case to show you what does look like a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. This is Lukumi versus City of Hialeah back in 1993. This was the first case in the history of the U.S. Supreme Court where the court found that there was a violation of the Free Exercise Clause after it had decided Employment Division versus Smith in 1991. Church of the Lukumi versus City of Hialeah. Is there anyone from Hialeah here? This is something that happened in your city. Back in 1993, there were a group of people who were a member of a Haitian voodoo religion called the Church of the Lukumi Babaluai. And this group of Haitian people who were practicing this religion, one central element of this religion involved animal sacrifice. And not only did it involve animal sacrifice, it involved a particular kind of animal sacrifice. It usually involved the slow bleeding of pigeons, doves, and goats. So basically it involved taking a knife to the throats of those animals and slowly bleeding them. Now, this sacrifice was generally happening in someone's backyard at this time. And the neighbors were getting very alarmed by the screaming goats, screaming pigeons, and so on, screaming doves, and all the blood all over the backyard. They were getting very alarmed by this. City of Hialeah was being pressured by the residents of Hialeah to do something about this. And they passed the following law. Very terrible law. Terrible not in any terms of violating civil rights, but just not a very intelligent law. This was the law, what the law said. Exactly what it said. No religious group no religious group, that was actually in the law, may commit any religious sacrifices involving animals in the city of Hialeah. And this was 2 years after Employment Division versus Smith. What did Justice Scalia say in that law? There's no violation of the Free Exercise Clause as long as you treat religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. What does Hialeah do? They refer to religion 3 different times in their law. No religious group may commit religious sacrifice in the city of Hialeah for any religious reasons. Okay, thank you. They passed that law. Obviously, this treats religious people and non-religious people totally differently. Because if you want to torture animals in the city of Hialeah, if you're just a malicious teenager, believe it or not, you can do that. You can do that because you're not doing it for a religious reason. But if you're a member of the Church of the Lukumi and doing it for a religious reason, see, now you're busted by the cops. But if you're a malicious teenager who decides to basically take a knife to a goat, you can get off scot-free in the city of Hialeah. But if you're doing it for religious reasons, busted, buddy. They're obviously treating religious people and non-religious people totally differently. It's a glaring example, something like that. What kind of hints should you look for on the bar exam? Look for like sort of nutty speeches by legislators. Look for that politician, and many politicians are like this. Look for that politician with a love for sensationalism and a big mouth, which is like 99% of all elected officials. Look for people like that. They'll usually make a speech something like along the following lines that, I think it's just wrong for animals to be tortured and hurt. I mean, what's up with that voodoo stuff or whatever those people, if you're his advisor, if you're his legal advisor, I mean, just like, just calm it down. The voodoo stuff happening in the city, what's that all about? I mean, no, don't do that. Don't do that. If you go in there, there's going to be a violation of the Free Exercise Clause. Watch for things like that. Watch for groups that are religious that seem to have to pass through more procedural hurdles than non-religious groups to get a license to do certain things. If you wanted to write a proper law in this case, you would write a very simple law saying, no religious sacrifices of any kind may occur in the city of Hialeah unless they are done for purposes of butchering at a commercially licensed abattoir. Something like that would have been totally fine. But instead, Hialeah just went way crazy overboard, referred to religion several times in that law. Obviously a violation of the Free Exercise Clause, subject to strict scrutiny. Is there a compelling government interest for the law? Hialeah says, well, we're trying to, number one, they did say this, we're trying, number one, to protect animals. And number two, when you have animals sacrificed in someone's backyard, there are obviously health reasons to the people themselves. They can get infected with blood and so on. So for the health of the people and the welfare of the animals, we're doing this. That in itself can be a compelling government interest, but the court said, then why are you just picking on religious people for that? And there, Hialeah had no answer. They basically said, I mean, they're doing it more than other people, though. That was not really an answer. That was not really an answer. And the court thought, I think your real compelling reason is that you just don't like people who belong to this church. That's like discrimination. That's just pure prejudice. That's not a compelling government interest, and the court struck it down. It never even passed the first part. It was not deemed to be a compelling government interest. Watch for that. Couple of exceptions with regard to the Free Exercise Clause I want to go over. Page number 3, where I wrote also and this too. Those are 2 exceptions to everything that I've told you about that you'll want to know. The general rule, just to repeat, is as follows. Under the Free Exercise Clause says, Congress shall not abridge the free exercise of religion. That's the Free Exercise Clause. Congress shall not abridge the free exercise of religion. How do you know there's a violation of the Free Exercise Clause? It does not treat religious people and non-religious people the same. If you have a law which does not treat religious people and non-religious people the same, that's a presumptive violation of the Free Exercise Clause, and you've got to subject that law to strict scrutiny. But there are 2 exceptions that I kind of want to tell you about. These are the 2 exceptions you want to know, because the bar, obviously, they're going to test you on the exceptions. That's where all the fun is. Seriously, they're not going to keep testing you, but do you think that religious group and non-religious group, are they being treated the same? I mean, they're not going to keep doing that. Think about it. They're going to go to the exceptions because that's where all the fun is. Now, the exceptions, there's 2 of them you need to know. One of them is just annoying, but I mean, don't blame me. It's the court's doing. The first exception is if you have a law which seems to violate 2 which seems to violate both the religious free exercise clause and some other fundamental right, that's probably more likely to make it a violation of the religious free exercise clause. Let me repeat that because I know that sounds a little confusing. If you have a law which violates some other fundamental law besides the right of religious free exercise, if you have a law which violates some other fundamental, like First Amendment right of free speech, or 14th Amendment right of families to enjoy their freedom together. Look for a law which violates some other fundamental right, because if you do, the court, they're going to give you a little bit more leeway to make your argument that it violates the free exercise clause right. Watch for that. If you have a law which violates a fundamental right other than the religious free exercise clause right, like the right of free speech, freedom of the press, 14th Amendment right of families to organize together, if you have a law which violates some other fundamental right, the court, they're going to give you, the challenger, a little bit more leeway to make the argument that it probably violates the free exercise clause right too. They're going to give you a little bit more leeway to make that argument. I'll give you an example of what that means. The first time the court kind of did this was in Yoder back in the 1970s, Yoder versus Wisconsin. These were the facts. Wisconsin had a law saying that every kid in the state of Wisconsin had to go to either a public school or a publicly accredited private school until that kid was 12 years old. He just had to. He had to go to either a public school or a publicly accredited private school until he was 12 years old. Mr. Yoder, he belongs to this religious group called the Old Order Amish, and they are not going to send their kids to any school, private or public. Those kids are going to remain on the Amish farm forever for the rest of their lives. They're going to stay there. They're going to learn agriculture. They're going to learn religion. Those people don't even have electricity and running water on that place in most places. They're going to study what it means to be a faithful believer in the Amish religion, which is kind of a descendant of the Quakers, old-fashioned Christianity. Now, Wisconsin is going to file criminal charges against Mr. Yoder because he's not sending his boy to either a public school or to a publicly accredited private school. He's keeping his boy back on the farm in Amish country. Mr. Yoder makes the following argument. Watch this. Can he make the free exercise clause argument by saying that this law, which requires every kid in the state of Wisconsin to attend either a public school or a publicly accredited private school, does that law treat religious people and non-religious people differently, or does it treat them exactly the same?
Different.
Same. Same. Didn't you work on that as a moot court? You worked on that in moot court.
Did this for 3 months.
That law saying that I don't care what your religion is, I don't care if you have a religion. Until you're 12 years old, you got to go to a public school or a publicly accredited private school. Does that law treat religious people and non-religious people the same? It does. Yoder is going to end up winning that case, so and here's why. This is the first exception. He pointed to some other fundamental right besides the right of religious free exercise. He pointed to some other right, and then he went back and made the free exercise clause argument. Here's the first argument he made. Remember the 14th Amendment due process clause? It says that no state shall deny any person life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Y'all remember that phrase, liberty? Especially the students who didn't have me. Does anyone remember that? Inside that phrase, liberty, are a bunch of stuff in there. And one of the rights that's in that phrase, liberty, is the right of families to organize themselves as they see fit. Remember Moore versus City of East Cleveland? East Cleveland had that kooky law that said that if you live in the city of East Cleveland, you got to be a family. And if you're going to be a family, we're talking about a husband and a wife and 2 kids. That's how they define family. Mrs. Moore, she was a grandmother who lived with 2 brothers who were not, she lived with 2 people who were cousins. Her and then grandsons who happened to be cousins. This was not a normal nuclear family in that regard. Now, in that sense, sorry, see if the door's closed. Go back to Yoder. Here was the argument that Mr. Yoder had to make. I have a right as a father, an Amish father, to teach my children as I see fit, to organize my family as I see fit as their father. And from my Amish eyes, it is better for little Ezekiel to stay on the Amish farm with us and for him to learn Amish religion and to learn about Amish ways. The court accepted that argument. The court accepted the argument that this is a right on the part of a father to teach special values to his son. Now, then after that, Mr. Yoder made the right of religious free exercise clause argument. And by the way, Your Honor, I'm just getting started because I got one more thing I want to say. We also think this is a violation of the religious free exercise clause. Now, his argument at that point became, this was the argument before Smith in 1991. Yoder's argument at that time was as follows. I know that law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. I know that. But you see, the burden on us Amish people is intense, Because we send our child to junior high school, what is he going to see? He's going to see people like you, in this room. And he's going to start doing the type of things that people in this room do. He's going to start listening to the type of music that you people listen to. He's going to start saying the curse words that you people listen to. He's going to start dancing the way that you people do at Barrister's Ball and so on. I mean, he's going to become corrupt. The burden on our religion is intense. That is exactly, if you don't believe me, that's exactly what Mr. Yoder said before the Supreme Court. His lawyer made the argument that, Your Honor, let me again clarify. If Mr. Yoder sends his boy to that school, he will be corrupted for life. For life. And he's never going to come back to that Amish farm if he sees St. Thomas University School of Law. He's never going to come back. He's never going to come back. And the court bought the argument. But do you see, this is the part that's important. If you're going to make that really burden argument as a parent or whatever, if you're going to make the argument that law, I know that law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. I know that, but it's burdening us more than non-religious people. If you're going to make that argument, you can get away with that if you couple that with a fundamental right argument going this way by saying, and Your Honor, it burdens us more than non-religious people. And by the way, one more thing, it violates another fundamental right. It violates another fundamental right, the right of families to be able to organize each other. It violates the right of families to organize each other. So again, if you're going to make the argument that you have a law which really burdens you intensely because of your religious beliefs, you can get away with making that argument even if the law treats religious people and non-religious people on the face exactly the same, if you couple that with that other argument saying that, by the way, it also violates some other fundamental right. Does everyone understand that? Yes? Okay, good. This is the second exception you got to know. Second exception. If the law treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, you can still make the argument that that law violates your right of religious free exercise with regard to one more thing. If you make the argument that, Your Honor, this law, which on the face treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, it is still a violation of my right of religious free exercise under the First Amendment for the following reason. I was denied unemployment benefits because of my religious beliefs. In other words, if you make the argument that I was denied my unemployment benefits, and probably some secular person would also have her unemployment benefits also denied as well. But I was denied my unemployment benefits specifically because I was religious. If you can make that argument, you can claim that there's a violation of the free exercise clause. Let me explain it. I know we just did Employment Division versus Smith, which sounds like exactly the opposite of what I just said. But let me compare what I'm trying to say, illustrate what I'm trying to say by virtue of a different case. Thomas versus Review Board. Thomas versus Review Board. This is the second exception. Thomas versus Review Board. Once I tell you the case, I think what I'm trying to say will become clearer. Thomas versus Review Board. Eddie Thomas is a member of the Jehovah's Witness religion. And for those of you who are unaware, it is a central tenet of the Jehovah's Witness religion not to help governments engage in wars. They cannot help governments engage in wars. They think this is a violation of their Christian principles. They cannot help the government engage in wars. Eddie Thomas, he works at a factory. And the factory has one thing. It creates steel. Large, huge walls of steel. Now, he works at this plant making this steel, and basically his job is very simple. There's this long sheet of steel, and he has this incredible blade, this roaring blade, which cuts right through the steel sheeting, and he does this all day long. All day long, he does this. And one day, his supervisor tells him, Eddie, come here. We already have someone taking care of that. Can you go down the assembly line and do something else? And he says, sure, boss, what's up? Okay. Further on down the line, we're going to take some of that steel which you just cut. We're going to fold it into a round turret. And then we're going to put it together. And he said, so boss, what does this round turret do? It's used to put on top of a tank to fire projectiles and blow human beings up. And then Eddie said, I can't do that. I mean, it's against my beliefs. I can't do that. And his boss was confused. But I mean, did you know you were cutting the same sheeting, it's the same thing. And not only that, this was actually in the case, not only that, but there are other members of the Jehovah's Witness religion who don't have a problem with turning it into turrets. You know this. You know those guys. They belong to your church. They don't have a problem with that because they're not helping to make war. They're just doing their job. But you got a problem with this, yeah? I can't do it. I mean, I don't know how those guys, I interpret my religion differently than those guys, boss. I mean, I can't do that. And then he said, I can't, if you're going to force my hand, I'm going to have to just quit. And so then he ended up quitting. He goes to Indiana's employment division because he wants to collect unemployment benefits. And they ask him, what happened? And he says, I quit my job. And they said, was your boss forcing you to do something illegal? No. I mean, not really, but he was forcing me to do something which violated my religious beliefs. I think it's a violation of my religious free exercise clause, so I couldn't do it. And said, well, we're not going to give you unemployment benefits because your boss had good cause to fire you if he wanted to. I mean, that's not even a good cause because of this, because look where they're getting at. The unemployment division says, if you did not have a religious reason and you just said, as a secular pacifist who does not believe in the existence of God, I cannot help this man create this turret which is going to be put on a tank which is going to kill people. If you were a secular pacifist, you would still not get the unemployment benefits. And here you are saying you're a religious person and you didn't want to do this. Well, you're not going to get the unemployment benefits that way either, because that law, our employment division's policy against giving unemployment benefits to people like you or secular people like you, it applies to religious people and non-religious people exactly the same. Does everyone understand Indiana's policy? Everyone gets this, yeah? Okay. Thomas is going to end up winning, though, in the case on the Supreme Court level. And here's why. Chief Justice Berger, he was also the guy who wrote the majority opinion for Yoder. Berger writes the majority opinion for Thomas versus Review Board, Indiana Review Board. And Berger makes the following argument. Usually, if you have a law which treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, that law is not going to be a violation of the free exercise clause, usually. But this ain't usually this time. And the reason it's not usually this time is because you can't force a religious person to choose between your religion or your ability to eat. You can't force a religious person to choose between that. You want to choose to believe in your God or you want to eat, boy. You cannot choose. You cannot force a religious person to make that choice, because you're forcing him to choose between you want to eat and survive or you want to obey your God. You cannot do that. The government cannot do that. So the court said, with regard to unemployment benefits, even if the unemployment agency has a policy that treats religious people and non-religious people exactly the same, if that unemployment office denies benefits to someone who quit his job for some genuine religious reason, that unemployment office cannot deny that religious person unemployment benefits. Does everyone understand that? That's your second exception. Jonathan?
It can't be a secular belief?
No, because the First Amendment right of religious free exercise says that Congress shall not abridge the free exercise of religion, not the free exercise of atheism or agnosticism. That's right. So there's no right for non-religious people in that sense. Does everyone understand that second exception? There are two. Let me know if you have any questions. We can talk about them now.
Genuine belief.
Genuine religious belief. Now the question of what is a genuine religious belief, that's like a totally different lecture in and of itself. The Supreme Court has never even quite defined it, but I'm glad you asked that question, and here's why. Watch for this on the final exam. Bar exam. Bar exam.
It's the final exam.
Capital F. Final. Watch for this. The student just asked an excellent question about genuine belief. One of the things the court is very reluctant to do you remember in the Faxon Thomas versus Review Board, Eddie Thomas's boss said that, you know, Eddie, there are two other guys down there. Don't they go to your Jehovah's Witness church? They don't have a problem with making that church because they don't think that it violates the religious beliefs, because they themselves are not killing anybody, right? Because they don't have a problem with that, but you do, and I don't understand. Maybe you don't understand your religion too well. Now, that actually came up before the Supreme Court. One of the arguments that Indiana's Attorney General made, the argument was that, Your Honor, Mr. Thomas professes to have a religious belief, but it's a very sort of peculiar religious belief because there were other Jehovah's Witnesses working in that factory who had absolutely no problem making the turret. Now, they did not have a problem, but Mr. Thomas does, which makes me question the sincerity of his religious beliefs, so-called. Here's what Berger said. Here's what I ain't going to do today. I'm not going to question whether someone believes in God the right way. If he believes in that, if that boy believes in that his own way, I'm not going to say, well, let's talk about your God and what you really believe. I'm not going to even open up that discussion. Because every person is entitled to believe God his own way. And I'm not going to start second guessing, why do you believe in your Jehovah's Witness religion in that way that's different from him? I'm not even going to begin that discussion. As long as he believes it himself, I'm not going to start second guessing him or start questioning him about that. Watch for that on the final exam. The court's very reluctant to get into these arguments about, but why do you consider that to be Jehovah's Witness? And other people, they no. And also the other reason they don't is because there's a small chance that this would end up violating the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which we're going to get to in just one second. Whenever you have government officials start telling people, well, you believe that's your Jehovah's Witness religion, but that's not what I think. I mean, I'm not Jehovah's Witness, but I talk with other Jehovah's, that's not what I think. That's an extremely dangerous position when you have government officials telling people, I think you're believing God the wrong way. That's really very dangerous. So they tend to refrain from doing that.
How do we approach a scenario where the court's compelling a priest to testify on, confession matters?
With regard to free exercise clause?
Yeah, compelling to testify on subject matter.
As far as I know, I could be wrong. My knowledge of the rules of evidence are a billion years past, but I don't think there's a priest. There's a legal exemption for that.
There is.
Is there?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Back in 1996, there was no exemption for that. Okay. But now you know, so that's good. Establishment Clause. Remember, there are two different clauses in the First Amendment with regard to religion. We've covered the Free Exercise Clause. Now we're going to cover the Establishment Clause. Establishment Clause is the flip side of Free Exercise Clause. Jonathan's kind of already anticipated this question about atheists and do they have rights and so on. They technically don't, not in any direct way, but indirectly they kind of do. The Establishment Clause says that Congress may not establish a religion or prefer religion over non-religion. Let me repeat that. The Establishment Clause says that Congress may not establish religion or prefer religion over non-religion. Congress may not establish religion, and they cannot prefer religion over non-religion. Also, Congress cannot prefer one religion over other religions either under the Establishment Clause. So there are three different parts to it. Number one, Congress cannot establish a religion. This is what the Establishment Clause says. Congress may not establish a religion. And then number two, Congress cannot prefer religion over non-religion. And then number three, Congress cannot prefer one religion over other religions. As you can see, it says Congress again. It doesn't say state or local governments. If you have an Establishment Clause question, you might want to just say the Supreme Court has extended the Establishment Clause to state and local governments in Everson versus School Board. The Supreme Court has extended, this is actually in the outline which I gave to you, but the Supreme Court has extended the Establishment Clause to state and local governments in Everson versus School Board. Establishment Clause is much more complicated in some ways than Free Exercise Clause, but for the bar it's much more straightforward because the bar is not going to test these other interesting alternative theories of Establishment Clause. There's only one test that the bar tests for. It's called the Lemon Test. That's what we're going to talk about today, the Lemon Test. It's not the only test that the Supreme Court has used to figure out whether there's a violation of the Establishment Clause, but the other tests that you might have studied in your other common law classes, like Kennedy has this anti-egalitarian test, and O'Connor has this anti-respect test, sort of second citizenship test. None of those things are going to be tested on the bar. The only test for establishment clause that will be tested on the bar is something called the Lemon test. And the Lemon test is really old test, going back all the way to 1971, but it's kind of a problematic test, but it's the thing that the court's going to use to test on the bar. The Lemon test are 3 different things that you're looking for. The Supreme Court is going to find that there's an establishment clause violation if any of the 3 are missing, any of the following 3 are missing. The Supreme Court is going to find that there's a violation of the establishment clause if any of the 3 are missing, any of the 3. Number 1, every single law must have a secular purpose. Every single law must have a secular purpose. This is already in your outline. There's nothing for you to write there. But every single law must have a secular purpose. The law's primary effect must neither be to advance nor inhibit religion. The law's primary effect must be neither to advance nor to inhibit religion. It must have a secular effect only. That's another way of thinking about it. And then number 3, the law cannot involve excessive entanglement between government and religion. The law cannot involve excessive entanglement between government and religion. The law cannot involve excessive entanglement between government and religion. Go back to that hypothetical where the student asked about the genuineness of the person's belief. If Chief Justice Burger asked Eddie Thomas, and this is what the Indiana Attorney General in Review Board was really trying to hope for to happen in that case. The Indiana Attorney General was hoping that the Chief Justice or someone on the court would start badgering Thomas and ask, why do you think that about your Jehovah's Witness religion when other Jehovah's Witnesses, they don't agree with you? I mean, that don't even seem like the Jehovah's Witness religion to them. Maybe it's not. The reason that Berger and the rest of the court did not want to get involved in that is because there was a potential violation of the 3rd prong of the Lemon test. It involves excessive entanglement between government and religion. It involves excessive entanglement between government and religion. Think about that. The Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court trying to tell a member of the Jehovah's Witness religion, I think you should think about what Jehovah's Witness religion really means to you, because I think it should mean something different. Crazy. The Chief Justice of the secular U.S. Supreme Court trying to become the ultimate judge of what it means to be a proper Jehovah's Witness. Crazy. That involves excessive entanglement between government and religion. That would surely probably violate the Establishment Clause. Let's get to some examples of these 3. Secular purpose. What is not a secular purpose? First example there. A law that required every public school classroom to post the 10 Commandments. There's no secular purpose behind that. This has come up in so many Supreme Court cases. There's always some school board that wants to post the 10 Commandments inside the school classroom. And the school board always makes the same argument over and over again. They say that, what is our secular purpose? I don't know, do you want to covet thy wife and kill thy neighbor? Is that what you're all about? They keep on making the argument that we're trying to teach school children, Your Honor, to be good people. Okay, you don't have to be a Christian to believe in the 10 Commandments, because whatever religion you are, those are moral virtues that apply to everyone. The court's response is, then why don't you just say, be a good person and don't do these things? But why do you have to say, God commands you? God gave the tablet to Moses. Moses carried them down from the mountain, and now Moses gives the tablet to you. Why the whole thing? So there's no secular purpose behind that. Although, watch for the school board will never be stupid enough to say, because we want to make them Christian. They're not that dumb. They'll say, we want to just teach them morals, Your Honor. I mean, 10 Commandments, I mean, every person believes in them, even if they don't believe in God, right? Watch for that. Why don't you just say it that way instead of like 10 Commandments and stuff? Watch for that. Second example, a law requiring teachers to hold a 1-minute session during class for prayer or meditation by students. This comes quite a bit too in Supreme Court and federal court jurisprudence. So look for a law where the school board has said, okay, in our school, we have a 1-minute daily time for reflection and meditation. And for those students who are of religious mind to pray to God and to reflect upon God's message to us. But for those people who are not religious, you can do your, yoga thing or whatever as well if you want to. Watch for that being brought up again and again and again. The Supreme Court is extremely suspicious about that, because there's always this sort of this is an opportunity for religious people to think about their God. And there's a sort of kind of like after the fact kind of attachment thing. And for all you Satanists out there, you can just like, reflect on, whatever secular thing that you want to as well. Watch for that. Of course, very suspicious about that. Private time for religious reflection and or secular meditation. The court does not like that. If it's a time purely for nap time, this is a great example. Do you remember back when you were in kindergarten? Or perhaps even your first year law school classes, some of them when you had nap time. The idea of mandatory nap time in your public schools, that's actually okay. Because what are you doing there? You're not reflecting, you're not meditating, you're not thinking about God, you're just falling asleep, and you're just going, you're just turning off the switch. That's actually okay. But watch for school laws that say this is a time for Christian students to reflect upon their God, and for non-Christian students to just have a little quiet time on their own. This court's very suspicious of that as not having a secular purpose. A law requiring public school teachers to teach creation science. This has come up quite a long time ago. It's not come up as often as lately, but creation science, I suppose this might come up again. Creation science, for those of you who are not familiar with this, basically it's a very simple belief. It's the idea that there is a scientific basis for the existence of God. But if you keep on looking at it, it's not really science at all. And the gist of the argument is as follows. Here we are at this law school, holding our pens, writing things, thinking thoughts, tapping out on our computers. What are the chances that a bunch of atoms and molecules just randomly collide and bring us here right now at this time together? Like zero, right? Which leads me to think that as a matter of science, someone else is pulling the strings. That's creation science. That's creation science. A lot of southern schools, Alabama in particular, have tried to implement creation science. They teach regular biology the first part of the class, and then they teach creation science for the second half. The court has struck down creation science by making the argument that it's not really science. What it is they're just trying to get in religion through the back door. And the reason it's not science is because, as everyone knows, at the heart of science is the ability to be able to test propositions for whether they're true or false. That's why we have science, to see whether something is true or false. But the idea is that, think about it, man. We are all here together now in this amazing way. Someone's got to be pulling the strings. You can't test that.
Isn't that like the Big Bang Theory, though? Just an opposite, that it is really just this random molecule exploding, and here we are.
That's the secular belief, but that can be tested. In other words, is it true or is it false? It can be tested in theory anyway. But this idea that someone's pulling the strings, this idea that someone's pulling the strings, I suppose, the notion is that, can I call this someone and ask them, are you there? This is fine. Yeah. It's not religion. The court is not condemning religion per se. Let's be careful about that. Rather, the court is saying that it's not science. What it is a matter of faith that person's suggesting. Someone's pulling the strings. That's a matter of faith. It can't be tested either way. The last example for secular purpose, this comes up in Kentucky sometimes. Posting the 10 Commandments inside a county courthouse. There's no secular purpose behind that. Again, the argument will be made that you're trying to remind people to behave themselves. You don't need the tablet from Moses to be able to do that. These are not secular purposes. What is a secular purpose? Watch for this. These are tricky examples of what actually is a secular purpose. You might not have thought this, but they are. McGowan versus Maryland, 1961. Everyone knows that there are cities and states which have laws which require businesses to close on Sundays. All cities have this. Laws which require businesses to close on Sundays. The main reason is to keep traffic down in downtown areas. Also, is to give cops a break. Because if they're working all the time, it's a lot of money for the city and they can't afford it. But why Sunday? That's the Christian Sabbath. Why not Saturday? Jewish Sabbath, or some other day for some other group. Why is it always Sunday for the Christian people? The court actually said, is there a secular purpose for closing it down? Okay, and the court said, yeah, there is a secular purpose. Number one is to save the city money, because if all the businesses are open on downtown on Sunday, I got to hire me more cops. And the city can't afford that. They're going to have to raise taxes. They don't want to do that. Number two is to cut down on traffic. People are there on the weekend. They want to cut down on traffic. That's fine. And then number three, and this is the part that's most interesting to me, the court said, okay, why else do we close on Sunday instead of Saturday? Because we've just been doing it for a very long time. And people are used to it now. That's it. That's seriously what the court said. We've been doing it for a very long time. People who are not Christian, they're kind of used to it now. And, it's fine. That's really the court's argument. That's really the court's argument. Watch for, in other words, the following factors. Watch for something that's been done an extremely long time, such that even people who are not religious, they've stopped even caring about why is it done on Sunday. Think about people who are like secular atheists. Two couples having coffee at Starbucks, and they're doing it on Sunday, and they're reading the New York Times together. Honey, did you ever think about why Sunday? I mean, should we sue them? I mean, why not Thursday, It's just not going to come up. Watch for one factor, the thing happening for a very long time. The court takes that seriously. If it's been happening for a very long time, the court thinks it was religious a long time ago, like when the Puritans settled the United States. But now, it's like Super Bowl Sunday and, go to the mall day and, people who are not Christians just like Sundays as well. It doesn't mean, it's not really religious anymore. And the court takes that very seriously. I'm being sort of facetious about it, but I'm quite serious. The court takes that argument very seriously. What primary effect? You cannot have a law whose primary effect is either to advance nor to inhibit religion. What's an example of a law advancing religion? This is the state of Thornton versus Caldor in 1985, page 5. You had a law prohibiting an employer from recruiting her employee to work on the employee's Sabbath. The Supreme Court said this violated the Establishment Clause's primary effect was to advance religion at the expense of non-religion. Basically, you had the law doing the following. You had this law passed by Miami-Dade County, and it said every single employer, if your employee is a Christian and she wants the Sabbath off, you got to give her that day off. And if she keeps on wanting that day off, you can't fire her or punish her. You got to give her that day off. Now that law, does it violate the rights of people who are atheists? The court said, yeah, it seems to violate someone who's atheist, because if you're atheist, boss, Sally, Sunday she's Christian and she wants to go to church. I belong to an atheist discussion group at Miami-Dade College, and we meet on Wednesdays. Can I have Wednesday off? What? I'm fired? What? This kind of thing. The court said there's no secular purpose behind this. It's just the primary effect is to give religious people an advantage, a benefit, which secular people cannot enjoy. There's no benefit that the secular people can enjoy the way that the religious people can. Does everyone see that? That's different from Super Bowl Sunday, because we all going to enjoy Super Bowl Sunday whether we believe in God or not, right? But this law that says that only religious people can get their Sabbath off and the employer cannot punish them, that treats religious people and non-religious people differently. That's also a violation of the free exercise clause. Y'all see that? It treats religious people and non-religious people differently. That's a violation of both the Establishment Clause because it's advancing a religious reason. It's also a violation of the Free Exercise Clause because it's treating religious people and non-religious people not in the same way. Everyone see that, right? There are many laws actually where there's a great deal of overlap where it violates both clauses, Free Exercise and Establishment Clause. What does have a secular effect? Watch for this too. This is kind of an interesting example. It shows the respect to which I think the court expresses to religious groups as well. This is a case brought on behalf of the Mormon Church. And you had a federal law which prohibits private employers from discriminating against people on the basis of their religious beliefs. In other words, you can't have St. Thomas University say, we're looking for someone to do IT work. Oh, you're not Catholic? I'm sorry, we don't hire people like you. There's a law that usually forbids that type of discrimination with regard to those jobs that are not intimately related to the functions of the church. But if it's with regard to something that's intimately related to the functions of the church, well, of course you can discriminate against them. You want to become Pope, but you're not Catholic? Well, I don't want to discriminate against you. Maybe we can have a secular Pope. That's actually not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So this is the dividing line that you got to think of. The church may discriminate against people with regard to that person's religious belief, like you're not a Catholic, so I like you as a person, but I can't hire you to do this job. The church can do that if that job is something that's intimately related to the functions of the church. So something dealing with a Sunday school teacher, for example. You got to have someone who's a Christian be a Sunday school teacher. But on the other hand, that guy who's doing IT work for your church, you don't really need to necessarily be a Christian for something like that. That guy who's working as a janitor for your church, he doesn't need to do that. but the Sunday school teacher does. Also, if you're going to hire someone as a priest, I mean, you got to hire someone from your own religion as your priest. So the further the job is from your church activities, the more possible it is to pass a law which prohibits the church, which prohibits the church from discriminating against that person on the basis of religious belief. But the closer that job is with regard to the intimate functions of that church, the law can permit the church. The law can permit the church to discriminate against people on the basis of their religious beliefs, and that's not a violation of the free exercise clause. Not a violation of the free exercise clause, because the law is not trying to advance religion. What it's trying to do is trying to respect religion. Because does everyone see this? This is actually kind of interesting. If you pass a law which says that I don't care what your church is hiring for, you live in my state, you can't discriminate against people on the basis of whether they're religious or not, or what their religion is. I don't care which job you're discriminating against people. Do you think that would violate the right of religious free exercise clause? Does it treat religious people and non-religious people differently? Your Honor, I'm a religious person. What do you think? You have a law which says that everybody in my state, you may not discriminate. If you're a private employer in my state, you may not discriminate against people on the basis of their religious beliefs. And I don't care what the job involves. Does it discriminate? Does it a violation of the free exercise clause? Or does it treat religious people and non-religious people exactly the same?
It's different.
How is it different?
In the sense that because you can choose, it's more intimate in the church setting, and you're now telling them that they can't choose a person that's not intimate in the church setting.
I think, yeah, that's good.
That will make it different than from a regular employer, which doesn't really matter for that.
I think that's really good. The first argument you can make is as follows. I think Just Money made a really good argument saying that there's something very different about a religious group in that instance because they have a church. But here I think you can also make a Yoder argument, backdoor, saying that, Your Honor, the 14th Amendment Due Process Clause says that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property like a church. And my property, the church. It's our property, the church. They cannot deprive that person's use of that property. You're depriving us a use of our property, our church. All the financial investments that went into our property, that is the church. You're depriving us of that property interest. Plus, this law is a major, intense burden on us in the same way it was for like Eddie Thomas. Same ways for Mr. Yoder. I think you can make a strong argument that's a violation of the free exercise clause in addition to the establishment clause. Now, excessive entanglement, the very last example here. Okay. This is the one I want to talk about. As you know, the federal government gives money to religious schools and to public schools as well. Here's one thing though. If the federal government gives money to religious schools and tells the religious schools, you can only use this money to teach children about stuff that is not religious. Now the problem is that this is almost for sure a violation of the Establishment Clause because it involves an excessive entanglement between government and church. It sounds reasonable on paper, but here's the problem though. Let's say there's this religious school, like my child, my oldest child, when she was in preschool, she was going to a Baptist fundamentalist school in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And at that school, she was the worst student there. At that school, one of the things they taught her was the idea of infinity. Now, you probably remember this from your elementary school days, but if you take like this is 0.0 over here, and you keep taking your little pencil and you're getting closer and closer and closer, in theory, you'll probably reach 0. But the idea of infinity is that, in theory, you can keep on making little notches for the rest of your life, and you'll never end up getting to 0. And then what her teacher, Miss Alford, told her was that, Carissa, you know why you'll never get to 0? It's because God created the idea of infinity. See, like God himself is infinity. Now, if that school had gotten money from the federal government, Miss Alford, is she teaching religion or is she teaching math? This is really difficult. And what it would require is the federal government sending an investigator, an assessment officer to that school 24/7, hanging out with every single teacher, making sure that's religion, that's not religion. Actually, that stuff about infinity, very cool. Very interesting. I don't really know, but if you have that government officer saying, to me, I think that's Christianity. You cannot have the government getting so involved in sort of like calling shots about is this religion or non-religion? Is this the proper Christianity or not? That involves excessive entanglement between government and church. That's why the government, when they give money in that regard, it creates sort of a problem of establishment clause proportions because it invites the government to constantly get involved in saying, oh, don't use the money for religious purposes, but they constantly have to get involved in the life of the church to figure out what is a religious purpose and what is not a religious purpose. Does everyone see that? Okay. Watch for entanglements in that manner. Okay. Any questions?
So what was the test? Like I understand the concept.
Yes.
I just need-
There's 3 different things. It cannot violate any of these 3 different things. This is on your outline over here.
like
Page number 4.
3. Like you were talking about the no excessive entanglement.
Yes.
What's the test for that? If the government is giving strings, how do they, get that test?
Something that's clean where the government doesn't have to get involved in it. So for example, the student asked a great question up front. What will involve something that disentangles the government from that situation? Here's something that the government could have done. I'll be federal government, you can be a private religious school. I'm going to give you money, the same amount of money I'm going to give that public school. May you both use it for purposes as you see fit to teach children. Does that make sense? That way they can, we don't know for sure whether that's going to survive, but it definitely removes them quite a bit. Does that make sense? I'm going to just give it to you. Just use it to teach your children. Does that make sense? And if they give the same amount of money to a public school, they're treating religious people and non-religious people exactly the same to teach children. There's a closer chance that it probably doesn't involve entanglement. Does that make sense? Or if they give them the following, this is actually even better. If the government actually gives them books, geometry books, go. And then they give the same geometry books to the public school and say, I hope they're useful, guys. Good luck. That's great, because then that does not involve the government sort of like constantly sort of looking over your shoulder. Are you using it for religious purpose? Just say, just go ahead and use. Public school use as well. Good luck, guys. Does that make sense? But if they say, I'm going to give you the book, I just don't want you to talk about it in any religious way. See, now I constantly have to get involved in your life, the life of the church, look behind your shoulder.
So they can give aid as long as they don't give requirements on how they.
Oh, that's a good way of thinking about it. Watch for qualifications in that regard where the government's constantly inviting itself into the life of the church. Thank you. Good question. All right, you guys good? Yeah? Okay, yeah.
Something with free exercise. I understood what you were saying when it has a neutral law and it violates them, that's a right. In our analysis, do you still, even though the case is likely to be won, do you still do rational basis for the free exercise analysis?
Yes. Yeah, every single law. The student asked an excellent question. Every single law has to be subject to some test under the Constitution. I mean, it just has to. There's no vacuum where it can just say, I'm out. I don't get tested today. Every single law is going to be tested in one regard or another. So if you have a law which is not going to be violating, which is not a presumptive violation of the free exercise clause, it has to be subject to a very easy, very conventional, rational review. No? You guys good? All right, guys. Good luck.
All right, hang on. Most important part. Anybody else? Yeah. All right. Let me grab the final tickets. Quetta, there. Also, thank you very much. Listen up for a second. While I'm gathering the tickets, for those who wish to stay, I'm sure, first of all, Mr. Kane will answer questions for you, but also, since this is a short lecture today, and the next class we're going to do essays in contracts and courts, I will stay for a few minutes afterwards to talk to you about some of the things that I think they're going to test on the exam in both essay and multiple choice. So if you're interested in hearing my preliminary thoughts, stick around. That won't take very long, but a lot of people have asked me about it already. All right, going once, going twice on tickets. All right, I'm going to mix them up, and then we're going to let Professor Kane draw. Josh, where are you? Yay! Oh, there's Josh. Okay. Josh? All right. Hang on one second. Please Professor King. Once again, if you want to take off, by all means, if you want to talk about what I think is going to be tested on the exam, hang on. And for those of you, by the way, there are some of you out there who are taking other bar exams. Obviously, this lecture today was very pertinent to what you're doing. Next week, when we're doing torts and contracts, much of what I'm going to be talking about is still going to be MBE, and so it will be useful for you even if you're taking another state. Okay. If you have questions for Professor King, by all means, if not,
How's the preparation for the students?
they're very
Oh my God, you want to stay, right?
in the way we set up the class and we finished the
Quick question. Hi, how are you? Great to see you.
Hi, what's up?
Have you been?
I'm on what about you?
You know, studying for the bar. I was just wondering if you had like summer office hours or would be taking emails and like went through your outline and had questions.
Sure, send me an email.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Hey there, Tiger.
Hey, what's going on? What's happening? Are you married yet? No, after the bar, right?
I don't
After
have
the
a
bar. You doing
microphone
okay?
today, so I'll shout as loud as I can. Let me take a few minutes to talk to you about what I think, at least so far, always with that caveat, my crystal ball is starting to clear, but it's not completely clear yet. And honestly, it is always, thank you, a little bit of an evolving target. But as I say, I've gotten a lot of questions about it, and I want to sort of get you thinking about certain topics. So, some of what I'm going to say to you now, some of you seem to know and some of you don't. So I'm going to start at the beginning. The first day, of course, is the Florida Day, and you are very likely to, I can't promise 100%, but I'd say 99%, very likely to get 3 essays in the morning and 3 multiple choice sets in the afternoon. Nothing is certain on the Florida portion of the bar exam except the following. You must be tested on the Florida rules of civil and criminal procedure. And they have never tested those rules in anything but multiple choice form. So that will be one of your multiple choice components, but that is one component, rules of civil and criminal procedure combined. In the afternoon, you get 100 multiple choice questions, or you probably will get 100 multiple choice questions. Never say never when it comes to this exam. For the past probably 30 years at this point, that's how they've tested. One component, approximately 30 questions, will be the rules of civil and criminal procedure. Then you will have 2 other components. That adds up to 90, doesn't it? Because you'll have 10 experimental questions, the ones they throw out. Okay? So you will get a total of 100 questions, 90 will count. Approximately 30 civil/criminal procedure. And approximately 30 from another topic and 30 from another topic. What are those topics likely to come from? Again, no guarantees, but what they have done in the past and are likely to repeat is 2 of the following 3 subjects. Business entities, which they have tested a lot frequently. They didn't last time, but 4 or 5 times previous to that. Evidence, Florida evidence, and wills administration, which they did test last time. So they did wills administration and evidence last time, along with the rules. Now, do not assume that they must test evidence. That's a common misunderstanding. They usually do, but they don't have to. Every so often, they test wills administration and business entities, and they leave evidence off. Honestly, I don't think that's what they're going to do this time, but just be aware that they could test both wills administration and business entities. Every 4 to 5 exams, that's what they do. So for the multiple choice, besides the rules of civil and criminal procedure, what do I think you're likely to see? I do think you're likely to see Florida evidence this time. And a little bit later this summer, we're going to have a session where we're going to do a set of Florida evidence multiple choice questions, questions that I picked out, that I wrote that test the things that are most likely to be tested. So we will cover that in a lot more detail later. So evidence, and interesting, I am struggling a little bit here. Do I BA, do I say wills? I'm leaning toward wills administration. Interesting, even though they tested it last time. Do not assume that just because they tested something last time, they won't test it this time. They really tested business entities to death. They just kept testing it and testing it and testing it. So they might be giving it a rest. Would I walk into that exam without knowing business entities? No way. And we will have a separate class on that a little bit later. But my sort of sense at this point for multiple choice, rules of civil and criminal procedure, evidence, and I'm thinking wills administration. And we will do a set of wills administration questions, multiple choice questions, along with the trust essay a little bit later. So that's your afternoon. The morning is the essays. Do they have to do 3 essays and then 3 multiple choice components? Honestly, no. Once upon a time, way back in the dark ages, when I took the exam, we did 4 essays and 2 multiple choice components. They probably aren't going back in that direction. Why? Because there are too many people taking the exam. All of those essays have to be graded, and it is a huge job to grade them. So I'm guessing that you're going to see 3 essays in the morning and 3 multiple choice in the afternoon. And what are those 3 essays going to be? Well, that's always the question. Now, I'm going to tell you about some of the things I think are more likely to be tested with a real big asterisk. Remember, first of all, they can and they do test up to 3 subjects per question. You can do 9 subjects easily. And honestly, when I look at some of the questions that they've given, I see 4 or 5 subjects sometimes, even though the bar doesn't say that it covers that many subjects. It really does. So the short answer is you have to know everything, which isn't real helpful. So what is at the very, very top of my list? I have to tell you, torts is at the top of my list. They haven't tested torts for the last 2 exams. They love to test torts. I think they're overdue on torts. Now, when we're going to do torts next week. There is something that has been kind of perplexing me for the last couple of weeks, because you may know that the Florida Supreme Court struck down the cap on med-mal back in February, I guess. And how does that affect your exam, and how do you study for it? You have to, even though they're going to tell you for the MBE, and it's true for MBE purposes, that the law is lagging behind and you're not going to be tested on recent changes. Not true for Florida. When Florida moved from joint and several liability to no joint and several liability, the bill went into effect on July 1st, and on July 25th, or whatever date it was, there was a torts question, and it dealt with multiple tortfeasors. So do not get lulled into complacency on that. When it comes to the Florida exam, particularly the essay portion, all they have to do is change the essay, change the answer to the essay, and they can keep the same question. So I'm thinking about, and we'll talk about more next week, exactly what you would do if you get a med-mal question on the exam, because honestly, they do like to test it, but we'll cross that bridge next week. I think some kind of tort question is inevitable, particularly because on the last exam, they did not test any of the new subjects. The exam before, the previous summer, they included secured transactions with contracts. Nothing new last time. You're going to get one of those new subjects this time. No way, you're not. Well, negotiable instruments, commercial paper, can, as Professor Martin will tell you in a couple of weeks, that can be combined with torts because as a defense to certain causes of action, you've got negligence and fraudulent endorsements and all sorts of tort-based concepts. So it's very possible that they could combine torts with commercial paper, negotiable instruments, or other things. I mean, that particular topic can combine with property, can combine with all sorts of stuff. But I think you should be prepared for torts. We'll talk about that more next week. What else? The inevitable Florida con law. They are not required to test Florida con law. Once upon a time they were, but they changed that, I think probably about 10 years ago. They usually test Florida con law. And I think you will see some aspect of Florida con law in the exam, but you can combine Florida con law with anything and everything. They combine Florida con law with property, homestead, those kinds of concepts. They combine Florida con law with wills and trusts, because you may have a revocable trust, and does the homestead go into the revocable trust, which Judge Shepard will talk to you about in a couple of weeks. They even combined Florida con law with contracts once. If you go back, fairly far back now, you'll find a case involving aluminum siding, installation of aluminum siding, and they very cleverly combined the contracts clause with a contracts question. So Florida con law goes with anything and everything. This last time, it had a little bit of constitutional criminal procedure in it. So be on the lookout for Florida con law. Even if you took Florida con law, and I know some of you did, please pay attention to it, because it is not easy. And in recent years, the Florida con law questions have been Florida specific. We had a period of time a while back where they were First Amendment, some of the stuff that Professor Kang talked to you about today. They've moved away from that. I don't expect they're going back in that direction. I think Florida specific, Florida con law is what you're likely to see. We have, I hate to say it, but a really peculiar constitution. Some of you know that already. So, torts, I think Florida con law, you want to be prepared for. What else? Contracts combines with everything in the world. And so could you have a little bit of a contracts component with something? Yeah, you could. And particularly, again, I'm thinking about the new subjects. If they don't get you on commercial paper, they might go back to secured transactions again, combines very easily with contracts. So you're going to see some kind of combination that could pull in a contract aspect to it. Property. They've tested property fairly heavily recently, including last time. Nice, juicy question, just your typical property question. Had adverse possession, easements, and statutory easement away by necessity. All that stuff that we love, right? I don't think you're going to get that kind of property question this time, but they do like to test property, and as I said, it combines with everything. So a little bit of property someplace. What's kind of farther down the list? Trusts, although not real far down, because they didn't test trusts last time. It's kind of my second tier, if you will. And interesting, and I went back and I looked again, they almost never test both wills administration and trusts on the same exam. Twice in the records that I keep that go back probably 25 years, did they test those two together. They usually don't. So if they're going to test wills administration and multiple choice, they probably aren't going to have a trust question. But don't ignore trust. Particularly, Depending on who you had for trust, none of us gets real deep into trust because there isn't enough time. And there's a lot to trust that's very easily tested. But it's on my second tier right now. What else is there that's farther down? But I don't want to put it very far down. Family law. They had a nice, juicy family law question last time, which suggests to me that they're less likely to test it. However, I thought last time, I really thought they were going to test family law last time, so I was right about that, but I thought they would include something like dependency. They haven't tested dependency yet. And it could easily be combined with family law. Well, they didn't. So if they don't take secured transactions or commercial paper and combine it with something, then you might see dependency combined with family law. The good news about family law is those questions are usually fairly straightforward. What else is left? Things that don't show up very often. Criminal law, for example. Every so often, they throw a little criminal law into a tort question. And you could easily see torts today. So don't ignore those Florida criminal law distinctions. There has not been a standalone criminal law question since the early 80s. Yeah. Doesn't mean they won't ever test it in essay form again, but they just don't. But a little bit of, for example, you could have a tort question involving a tort, assault and battery. Well, you could have a criminal aspect to it. Very easy to do. What else? Federal constitutional law. They can, and they occasionally, but only occasionally, do have a federal constitutional law question of the type, again, that Professor Kane was discussing. If it's going to be federal con law, it's going to be something pretty broad-based that you can write about. I don't think that's what they're going to do, but just, again, be aware. And federal criminal procedure. You may not have gotten very far into your studies yet. Some of you have done con law, though. And maybe you haven't done criminal procedure yet, and you haven't done Florida con law, but in Florida, we use the federal model for Fourth and Fifth Amendment. We must, the Constitution says we must. And so the law is identical for what I would call federal criminal procedure, Fourth and Fifth Amendment. So identical in Florida. They do throw little components of it in from time to time, including, as I say, last time in the Florida con law question. So I don't think it's going to come up again, but again, eyes and ears open. The last thing to consider that will show up someplace as an add-on is professional responsibility, Florida-specific professional responsibility. A couple things to mention about it. Number one, it will be stuck on the end of a question. Do not be misled, though. Just because it's the last thing at the end of the question doesn't mean it's not important. In fact, it's the last thing the grader reads. And so it's very important. Plus, think about it. You guys are knocking on the door, and you are saying to the rest of us, let us into your club. You want to join my club? You got to know the rules. Final comment. Really important comment there. Remember I said it's at the end of the question. Always, always, always turn your question sheet over and look at the back. Some years ago now, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point, they had, I think it was a torts question. The question went on in the front, and it seemed to reach a logical ending point at the bottom of the page. People sat down, and they're writing away, and they're writing these great answers. They turn their blue books in, and then they walk out, and somebody says, what'd you think about that pro-rep question? What pro-rep question? On the back. A lot of people completely missed that question because they didn't turn the page over. So make sure you turn your page over. And if there is a pro-rep question, make sure you address it, because it is more important than you might think. Again, you're asking to join my club. You gotta know the rules. They're pretty limited in what they test. They love to test fees, contingency fees, fee splitting. They like and especially recently, they like to test conflict of interest. They used to test advertising a lot. They really haven't done that lately. I'm guessing what you'll get will be fees and/or conflict of interest. So make sure you review those Florida-specific rules. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about the grading. There's a lot of confusion here, and I'm going to tell you how it's done. Every time after the exam, somebody comes back and says to me, but I got 170 on Florida, and how could I have failed it? Well, here's how it works. You get a raw score on both the MBE and the Florida portion. MBE is real easy to explain. 200 questions, maximum 200 raw. And then they scale, and they always scale up because they throw out a certain number of questions, experimental questions, questions that don't test well. You will get scaled on the MBE anywhere usually between 10 and 20 points. The lower your MBE score, the more likely you are to get more points in scaling, because if they throw out a question and you already got it right, you don't get an extra point. So somewhere between 10 and 20 points additional on the MBE portion. Easy to understand. Florida, not so easy to understand. You get 100 points each for 3 essays. That's 300 points, maximum, of course. And by the way, a couple of years ago, and a St. Thomas grad got 100 on the torts essay. In all my years of working with the bar, I've never seen anybody anywhere get 100, and one of our students did. So can you guys get the 100? Maybe you don't want it, but you can get it. Why do I say you don't want it? If you get that really high score, then you get the privilege the next time around of being a grader. You don't want that privilege. We're going to talk about that in a second. That's the reward you get for getting the 100. But can you get it? Absolutely. So 300 points for each essay. 90 points for all of the multiple choice questions, the 3 multiple choice components. Remember, 100 multiple choice questions, but only 90 are counted. So now you have 390 points. But you had 200 for the MBE. So they scale Florida down, they squeeze it down so that you have 200 maximum on Florida, 200 maximum on the MBE, so that they're equal. How do they scale down? Well, honestly, it's a big mystery, which they won't talk very much about. And Supreme Court's known for a certain amount of fiddling with the numbers, but it works approximately like this. We have taken our statistics, or our numbers, handed them to the statistics department here, and they have verified certain things. So I can tell you approximations. They run a formula that tries to equalize the 6 parts, 3 multiple choice, 3 essay, so that each part is worth the same. So they squeeze down the essay score, they inflate the multiple choice, it comes out approximately equal. And then that gives you a score. Your raw score, again, could be a 170, scaled down in Florida. Always scaled down in Florida, with one exception. Scaled down. Your 170 might become a 145. But 2 people could have an identical raw score, 170 and 170, and one ends up with a scaled score of 145 and another with a scaled score of 150. Why? It depends on where your points came from. Did your points come from the essay, they squeeze it down more? Did it come from the multiple choice? So don't freak out when you see, number 1, your raw score in Florida scaled down, and number 2, your score that was raw being scaled down to a number different from your other friend. Now, the only time that you're scaled up in Florida, I don't want anybody in this room to fall in this category. If you score below 100 raw, ooh, painful. Can happen though. Then they scale you up to 100. But you have to do really poorly, right, to scale below 100 raw on the Florida portion. That's the only time when you get bumped up. So remember again, 136, 136, average, that's how you pass. Now, one final comment on grading, and then I'll take any kind of questions that you have, because again, we get a lot of questions about this particular point. Multiple choice, they throw it through the Scantron machine, we're done. The essays are hand graded, they have to be. Who are the graders? As I said before, the graders are recent successful applicants, people who did really well on the Florida portion of the exam are graders. And every year, some of our students end up being graders. You can't say no, think about it. If the bar says to you, congratulations, won't you help us out? You're kind of stuck. It's an awful job. Each grader, I've graded thousands of, maybe hundreds of thousands of essays at this point in my life, and it's torture. I hate to say it, it's torture. These graders who are working stiffs, who are working at new jobs, they get 300 essays each and a very short period of time to grade the essays. So, number one, have pity on your grader. When I'm critiquing your essays, and I appreciate the fact I got a whole bunch of them in this week, and so I'm working through them. Some of you have gotten them back, the others you'll get them back within the next couple of days. Have pity on your grader. Make it easy for your grader. How do you make it easy for your grader? Just follow that IRAC form, the little mini IRACs, which we're going to be talking about in the next few weeks. Short, simple, to the point. Don't overwhelm them, don't underwhelm them. The grader is going to sit there with a grading outline, which was initially written by the person who wrote the question. Who writes the questions? Somebody from some other state. I've written questions for bar exams in other states. I don't write them for Florida for the obvious reason. Here I am. And so it's going to be someone from someplace else who wrote the question and wrote a grading answer. Here are the issues that should be discussed, points that should be allotted. Then, using that grading outline, they pull the graders together and they have what they call calibration sessions, which I have attended, so I do know how it works. Over a short period of time, each grader is given about 40 exams to grade using that grading outline. And you make comments. Grading outline works here, it doesn't work there. Everybody's talking about A, nobody's talking about C. I think B is worth 10 points instead of 5. Once they've graded their 40 exams, they come back together and they talk about what they found and they calibrate the grading outline. They make final decisions about what goes in, what goes out, and what point totals should be allocated. Once they decide, the grading outline is frozen, which is really important from your perspective. Because each, you think about it, each grader is grading 300 essays, but they've got to achieve uniformity. And so it is a very rigid grading process. Now, when I'm grading exams, law school exams, I have my grading outline, I always do. But, I might occasionally get an essay and I'll say, wow, that's kind of interesting. I didn't think about that. Kind of creative, give a little bit of extra points there. Once the calibration session is done, that's it. Your creativity is out the window. Your goal has to be to duplicate the grading outline as closely as possible. No more, no less. The closer to the grading outline you get, including how you organize, the more points you get. And that's what it's all about, because it doesn't matter what law school you went to. You talk to anybody across the state of Florida, you pass or you fail the Florida portion based on your essays. 3 good essays are absolutely essential to passing Florida. And you get 3 good essays by duplicating the grading outline. If you go off on a tangent, and you're the only one who went off on the tangent, it could be a Supreme Court winner, but you get no points because it's not in the grading outline. So, be very cautious of that. Now, one final comment. As you are preparing and as you are practicing, and I know a lot of you, because this is a question I've gotten a lot this week, you're looking at 2 things. You're looking at the sample answers in the commercial books, number 1, And number two, you're looking at the answers that have been posted online by the Florida Bar. Number one, the sample answers in the books are that. They are sample answers, they are not model answers. On purpose. The commercial courses are trying to show you something that could be written in an hour, not necessarily the perfect answer. You're going to see, as I go through my sessions, I give you more detail because it's a learning exercise. But understand that the answers in the book are not meant to be perfect answers. You may see an issue. I've had some people asking me about issues with the Carrie and the Paul and the cakes and things question. Do I think quantity was a really big issue? I do. And yet, answer didn't touch, yeah. So, understand that. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you quantity was a big issue, but that we'll talk about that with contracts next week. The answers, and this part is really important, the answers that are posted by the bar online, even though the bar chose them to post them. If you go back a few years, there is a trust question that the bar chose to publish online. And the student wrote multiple pages about an intravenous trust. Intravenous trust. As a professor of wills and trusts, I looked at that question and, it's like, yeah. That student would not have gotten a very good grade, but there it is, published by the bar. So if you see something online or in the commercial books, you question the law, you question what's there as an issue that's been spotted, or you question an issue that you think should have been there, don't assume you're wrong. Ask. Ask me, and we've got a great faculty that can help you substantively in many areas. Ask about it. Don't assume that what's there is the perfect answer. Now, we're going to talk about, how you format and what you look for and what's tested in the various areas as we go through the next few weeks of classes. But are there any general questions at this point? Anything anybody wants to ask? Yes, sir.
Since you have to allocate Florida and how does the rollover?
The rollover, is that what you said?
Yeah, the rollover points.
Yeah. You need, if you elect, and I would recommend, of course, that you all elect to have the combined score, you need an average 136. So if you get a 139 on Florida and a 135 on the MBE, your average is going to carry you over the top. And of course, vice versa. Be very careful, though, about relying on one section, whichever section it is, to be honest, to carry you through. Really bad idea to put all your eggs in one basket. Because even, take MBE for example, a lot of students oftentimes think that's all I got to do and I won't have to worry about Florida. You might be getting 75% correct while you're practicing, which is a great percentage. You walk into the exam, whatever percentage you got right in practice, you won't get that percentage on the exam, no matter what it is, and no matter who you are. So you can't rely, number one, on one section to carry you through. And with the averaging, every time somebody, and you probably know one of those somebody's going to get the 135.5.
Wow.
You fail. You get a 136 on one part and a 135 on the other, you're taking the exam again. So be very careful about that, but that's how it works. Other questions? Yes, sir.
You mentioned how they do release past essays, right?
Yep.
Do they release past grading rubrics so we can maybe get an idea of what they're looking for specifically?
No, they don't. Wouldn't we all love it? They guard those grading rubrics very jealously. And so, when I talk to you, by the way, when I'm talking to you, I'm going to use actual bar exam questions. I do my own research, I write my own answers. It's my best guess of what the grading rubric is. Do I know, does anybody know, except for the people who actually graded? Nope, and you'll never find out. Josh?
My question concerns timing for the essays, because you're allowed 3 essays, 3 hours,
Yep.
an hour each, obviously.
Yes.
And so you said that they could test up to 3 subjects per essay. Would you suggest like certain subjects, like if it's a tour question but the pro rep is last, maybe it's not as important perhaps? Or would you suggest like that certain subject, if it predominates the question, focus more of your attention to that because that's where most of the points are?
It's a good question. My best advice to you, again, we'll be talking about this, is to follow the call of the question. So in terms of order, always follow the call of the question. And you'll see as you go through the next couple of months, in Florida, we do use the modern style, the recommended style for essays. We don't for multiple choice, but we do for essays. And it's a very short fact pattern and a very clear call of the question. So number one, call the question, answer it in order. Number two, how much emphasis? That's where letting the facts talk to you comes into play. Those of you who have me in class, you know I say always let the facts be your guide. The facts are going to tell you which parts are bigger and which are smaller. Yes, sir.
You say that you scale up for the MBE, so about approximately you need between a 116 and a 126 raw score to get to pass.
Yes.
What would you say we need on the multiple choice and essays raw score to pass?
In Florida, it's very hard to predict on that because it depends on what you got on each section. But I will say this, generally speaking, what passes you in Florida is an essay score on each of the three that is above the mean, and the mean varies greatly. So, and I'll come back to that point in a second. And multiple choice scores that are in at least the high teens, 17, 18, 19. I can't be more specific about Florida because the mean varies so much from exam to exam. If you get, for example, a family law question, the mean could be 60 or 61 or 62, and you just want to get that 63 or 64. There have been Florida con law questions in the past, and they hit a patch where it happened, and the examiners were kind of going, what's going on here? Means in the 30s. That's one where it was like 33. So then you want to get the 34 or the 35. Always aim for those essays above the mean. That's your key to passage in Florida, whatever the mean is. And by the way, as you are getting your graded exams back from whatever commercial course you're doing, they do tend to put a point total on it, but don't get too wedded to the point total because the mean varies from exam to exam, from question to question. Just always shooting above the mean. Am I better than average? That's what gets you past Florida. Okay, other questions? Okay, if that's it, then we'll see you next week for Torts and Conference.